Life begins without our consent. None of us chose to be here, yet here we are, thrust into a world of complexity, contradiction, and suffering. The Romanian philosopher Emil Cioran, often regarded as one of the most uncompromising thinkers in the history of pessimism, argues that this silent imposition of life, is not merely unfortunate but carries a moral weight. Is it, as he suggests, a crime to bring new life into a world where suffering is inevitable? Is the act of procreation not an innocent continuation of life, but a deliberate choice to impose the burden of existence on another being, one who never asked for it? We begin with a simple observation: life is suffering. This is not a novel idea. It echoes through the works of Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Buddhism, and countless others. The inevitability of pain, loss, and death is woven into the fabric of existence. And yet, despite this, the human drive to procreate persists. We seek to extend ourselves into the future, to create new lives, to leave a legacy, but at what cost? Cioran's argument begins with the premise that birth is not a neutral event. It is a rupture, a violent tearing away from the serenity of non-existence. Before birth, there is nothing, no pain, no fear, no longing. To be born is to be thrust into a world where these things become unavoidable. From the first breath, we are on a trajectory towards suffering. The child who is born today will grow, experience joy and sorrow, love and loss, health and illness, and finally, the inevitability of death. Is it right, then, to bring someone into existence knowing that this is the path they must walk? You might argue that life also contains beauty, love, and meaning. And this is true: life is not solely suffering. But here is the question: do these fleeting moments of joy justify the weight of existence? Is the possibility of happiness enough to outweigh the certainty of pain? When we bring a child into the world, we cannot guarantee their happiness. We cannot shield them from illness, heartbreak, disappointment, or death. What we can guarantee is that they will suffer in some form or another, because suffering is an inescapable part of being alive.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Cioran takes this idea further. He suggests that consciousness itself is the root of our suffering. To be conscious is to be aware of our own existence, to feel the passage of time, to know that we will die. This awareness brings with it a profound sense of unease. A stone does not suffer because it is not conscious. An animal suffers less than a human because its consciousness is simpler, less burdened by abstract thought. But for us, with our complex minds, suffering is magnified. We imagine future pains, regret past mistakes, and struggle to make sense of a world that often feels meaningless. Would it not be better, then, to spare another being from this burden? And yet, even as we recognize the inevitability of suffering, we are drawn to life. We cling to it, despite its hardships. Why? Is it simply a biological imperative, a survival instinct that overrides reason? Or is there something in us that believes, against all evidence, that life is worth living? If so, where does this belief come from? Is it an illusion, a comforting lie we tell ourselves to make existence bearable? Cioran's philosophy forces us to confront these uncomfortable questions. He does not offer easy answers. In fact, he often seems to revel in the contradictions of his own thought. He acknowledges the beauty of life even as he condemns it. He writes of the joy he finds in music, art, and nature, even as he insists that existence is a tragedy. This tension is central to his work. It reflects the complexity of life itself, a mixture of light and darkness, hope and despair. But what are we to do with this knowledge? If we accept Cioran's premise that birth is the root of all suffering, how should we live? Should we refuse to have children, as he suggests? Should we embrace the philosophy of antinatalism, which holds that it is morally wrong to bring new life into the world? Or should we reject his conclusions and continue to celebrate life, despite its flaws? These are not easy questions, and there are no simple answers. But they are questions worth considering, especially in a world that often seems to prioritize growth and reproduction above all else. What does it mean to bring a child into a world that is facing environmental collapse, political instability, and social inequality? What kind of life can we offer them? And what responsibility do we have for the suffering they will inevitably experience? Cioran's philosophy is not for the faint of heart. It challenges us to look at life without illusions, to confront the harsh realities of existence. But it also offers a kind of freedom. By acknowledging the inevitability of suffering, we can begin to let go of the need to justify life, to find meaning where there may be none. We can learn to accept life for what it is, a mixture of beauty and pain, joy and sorrow. And in that acceptance, we may find a kind of peace. But acceptance is not the same as resignation. Cioran himself did not give up on life. He did not retreat into despair or nihilism. Instead, he found ways to endure, to navigate the challenges of existence. He wrote, not to provide answers but to express his own struggles and contradictions. His work is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. So, where do we go from here? How do we reconcile the desire for life with the inevitability of suffering? How do we make sense of a world that often seems senseless? These are questions that each of us must answer for ourselves. But perhaps, in asking them, we can begin to live more consciously, more authentically, and with a deeper understanding of what it means to be alive. Let us address the heart of Cioran's argument, consciousness. To him, consciousness is not a gift but a curse, the source of our deepest torment. Consider this for a moment. What does it truly mean to be conscious? It means to know, to feel, to anticipate, to remember. It means to be aware of one's existence in time, to carry the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Consciousness is the very thing that separates us from the inanimate, the animal, the plant. Yet for all its complexity and sophistication, it also separates us from peace. Think about this: a stone does not suffer. It exists effortlessly, without needs, without fear. A tree grows, but it does not anguish over its growth. An animal might feel pain or hunger, but it does not contemplate the meaning of its life or fret over its eventual demise. Humans, however, are different. Our consciousness turns every moment into a potential source of suffering. A memory of loss, a fear of what lies ahead, a longing for something we cannot have. Consciousness creates suffering, and without it, suffering would not exist. Cioran called consciousness a dagger in the flesh, an apt metaphor for its paradoxical nature. On one hand, it is what makes us human, our ability to think, to create, to love, to wonder. On the other hand, it is what makes us suffer. We are tormented not only by what happens to us, but by our awareness of it, by our ability to imagine how things might have been different, or how they might go wrong in the future. Consciousness allows us to experience joy, but it also amplifies pain, regret, and dread. What, then, do we do with this knowledge? If consciousness is the source of our suffering, is there any way to escape it? Cioran believed that the only true escape from consciousness is death, or better yet, never having been born in the first place. But for those of us who are already here, alive and conscious, this is not a practical solution. We must find a way to live with the burden of consciousness, to endure the pain it brings. Cioran offers no systematic advice, no step-by-step guide to reducing suffering. But there are hints in his writing glimpses of how he himself coped with the weight of existence. One of his methods was acceptance, not a passive resignation, but a kind of defiant acknowledgement of the absurdity of life. To accept that life is suffering is not to give up on it, but to stop expecting it to be something it is not. It is to let go of the illusion that life owes us happiness or meaning. In this acceptance, there is a kind of freedom. But acceptance alone is not enough. There is also the question of how we live, how we navigate the inevitable suffering of existence. For Cioran, writing was one answer. He described his books as postponed suicides, a way of channeling his despair into something creative, something that could outlive him. Writing gave him a sense of purpose, however fleeting, and allowed him to confront his own thoughts and feelings. What about us? What do we turn to when life feels unbearable? Is it art, music, relationships, work? Do these things truly alleviate our suffering, or do they merely distract us from it? And if they are distractions, is that necessarily a bad thing? Cioran himself admitted that distractions, though fleeting, are sometimes the only thing that makes life bearable. A beautiful piece of music, a moment of laughter with a friend, the simple pleasure of a walk in nature. These moments do not erase suffering, but they offer brief respites from it. Yet, even as we seek these moments of relief, we cannot escape the larger question: what is the point of it all? Why endure suffering if it is, in the end, inevitable? Why bring new life into a world where suffering is guaranteed? These are the questions that haunt Cioran's work, and they are questions we must grapple with as well. Perhaps one of the most unsettling aspects of Cioran's philosophy is his rejection of the idea that life has inherent meaning. For many of us, meaning is what makes suffering bearable. We endure pain because we believe it serves a purpose, because we believe it is part of a larger story. But what if this is an illusion? What if life has no meaning, no purpose, no ultimate goal? If this is true, if life is indeed meaningless, does that make it unlivable? Not necessarily. Meaning, Cioran suggests, is something we create for ourselves. It is not something we discover, but something we impose on a chaotic and indifferent world. This act of creation can be empowering, but it can also feel hollow. After all, if meaning is something we invent, how can we ever be sure it is real? This brings us back to the question of procreation. If life is suffering and meaning is an illusion, what justification can there be for bringing a new life into the world? Is it not, as Cioran suggests, an act of cruelty, a crime against the unborn? When we choose to have children, we are not only choosing to experience the joys and challenges of parenthood, we are also choosing, on behalf of another being, to expose them to the full spectrum of human suffering. You might argue that this is a pessimistic view, that life is not solely suffering, that there is also beauty, love, and joy. And this is true. But is it enough? Is it enough to justify the pain, the fear, the loss? And who are we to decide this for someone else? When we bring a child into the world, we are making a decision on their behalf, a decision they cannot consent to. Is this fair? Is it ethical? Cioran's philosophy does not offer easy answers, but it forces us to confront these uncomfortable questions. It challenges us to think deeply about the choices we make, about our responsibilities to ourselves and to others. It asks us to consider not only the joys of life, but also its burdens, not only the beauty of existence, but also its darkness. And yet, for all his pessimism, Cioran did not deny the existence of beauty, of joy, of moments that make life worth living. He did not argue that life is without value, only that its value is overshadowed by its suffering. This tension, this contradiction, is at the heart of his philosophy. It reflects the complexity of life itself, a mixture of light and darkness, hope and despair. So where does this leave us? How do we live with the knowledge of suffering, with the awareness of our own mortality, with the weight of consciousness? How do we make choices about procreation, about how we spend our time, about what we value, knowing that life is finite and often painful? These are questions that each of us must answer for ourselves. But perhaps in grappling with them, we can begin to live more intentionally, more authentically, and with a deeper understanding of what it means to be alive. Let us turn now to the most profound ethical dimension of procreation, the responsibility it entails. When we choose to have a child, we are not merely continuing a biological process or fulfilling an instinctual drive. We are making a decision that will define the existence of another human being, a being who will experience the full weight of life with all its suffering, its joys, its absurdities, and its inescapable end. This is not a choice to be taken lightly. It is perhaps the most consequential decision we can make, and yet, how often is it treated with the gravity it deserves? Cioran describes procreation as a crime and act of imposing life upon someone who never asked for it. This framing may seem extreme, even offensive, but it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth: the decision to have a child is always made on behalf of someone else. The unborn cannot consent to being brought into existence. They cannot weigh the potential joys of life against its inevitable suffering. They are silent, powerless, until the moment they are born, and then, like all of us, they are caught in the web of existence with all its burdens and contradictions. What gives us the right to make this decision for another person? Is it our love for life, our belief that it is worth living despite its hardships? Is it our desire to continue our lineage, to leave a part of ourselves behind? Or is it simply the force of biology, the primal urge to reproduce? Whatever the reason, it is a choice that carries immense ethical weight. It is a choice that defines the entire trajectory of another human being's existence. And what of the world into which we bring them? Can we, in good conscience, bring a child into a world that is so often marked by injustice, suffering, and uncertainty? Consider the state of the planet: environmental degradation, economic inequality, political instability, and the looming threat of global conflict. Can we guarantee that the world our children inherit will be one in which they can thrive? And if we cannot, do we have the right to impose these challenges upon them? Of course, there are those who argue that life is always worth living, that even in the face of suffering, the joys of existence make it worthwhile. They point to the beauty of nature, the power of love, the thrill of discovery, the comfort of human connection. And these things are real, they are undeniable. But are they enough? Are they enough? Are they enough to justify the pain, the loss, the inevitable confrontation with death? There is a certain arrogance, perhaps, in assuming that we can decide this for another person. When we choose to have a child, we are making a bet on their behalf, a bet that life will be more joyful than painful, more meaningful than empty. But this is not a bet we can guarantee, and when the stakes are so high, when the cost of being wrong is so immense, how can we justify taking that risk? Cioran's philosophy forces us to confront the darker side of this decision. He argues that the act of procreation is not merely a continuation of life, but an imposition of suffering. To bring a child into the world is to expose them to the inevitability of pain, loss, and death. It is to place upon them the burden of consciousness, the weight of existence. And for what? For the fleeting moments of joy that may or may not come, for the chance to continue a lineage, to pass on a name, to fulfill a biological imperative. For Cioran, these reasons are not enough. They do not outweigh the moral responsibility we bear when we choose to create life. And yet, he does not deny the complexity of the issue. He acknowledges that life contains beauty, that it is not solely suffering. But he also insists that this beauty does not erase the ethical dilemma of procreation. It does not absolve us of the responsibility we bear for the lives we create. This brings us to a profound question: what does it mean to be responsible for another person's existence? When we bring a child into the world, we are not only responsible for their physical well-being, but also for their emotional and psychological development. We are responsible for guiding them through the complexities of life, for helping them navigate its joys and sorrows, its triumphs and defeats. And yet, no matter how much we love them, no matter how well we care for them, we cannot protect them from suffering. We cannot shield them from the pain of loss, the fear of death, the existential uncertainties that come with being human. This is the paradox of parenthood: to love someone so deeply, to want the best for them, and yet to know that you have brought them into a world where they will inevitably suffer. How do we reconcile this? How do we live with the knowledge that our love, however deep, cannot erase the burdens of existence? Cioran suggests that the only way to truly spare someone from suffering is to spare them from existence itself. This is the essence of his antinatalism, the belief that it is better never to have been born than to endure the suffering that life entails. But this is not an easy position to hold. It goes against our deepest instincts, our most cherished beliefs about life and love. It challenges the very foundation of human existence, the drive to create, to reproduce, to continue. And yet, there is a certain logic to it. If we accept that suffering is inevitable, if we accept that life is a mixture of joy and pain, beauty and sorrow, then we must also accept the ethical weight of bringing someone into this world. We must accept that by creating life, we are also creating the conditions for suffering. But does this mean we should all stop having children? Should we, as Cioran suggests, embrace the philosophy of antinatalism and bring an end to human existence? This is a question that each of us must answer for ourselves. It is not a decision to be made lightly, nor is it a question with a simple answer. For some, the joys of life outweigh its sorrows. They believe that the beauty of existence, the love, the connection, the creativity is worth the pain. For others, the inevitability of suffering makes the act of procreation seem cruel, even immoral. Both perspectives are valid, and both reflect the complexity of the human experience. But perhaps the most important thing is not whether we choose to have children or not, but how we approach the decision. Do we treat it with the gravity it deserves? Do we consider the ethical implications, the responsibilities, the potential consequences? Or do we simply follow our instincts, our desires, our cultural norms without questioning them? Cioran's philosophy invites us to question, to reflect, to challenge the assumptions we often take for granted. It does not offer easy answers, but it does offer a deeper understanding of what it means to be human, to be alive, to be responsible for another life.